Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the quiet folds of time and follow the vanished footprints of a 12-year-old boy who just baffled the temple elders in Jerusalem and then disappeared. No journal entries, no teenage tantrums recorded. Not a single scroll mentions where he went, what he did, or who he became during the next 18 years. The Gospels just hit mute. You're walking beside him now, through dusty villages, along silent rivers, maybe even into the Himalayas where monks still tell strange stories about a holy stranger from the West. It's part history, part legend, part late-night fever dream, and honestly, you probably won't survive this rabbit hole. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little journey travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Vanishing from the temple, the boy disappears from Jerusalem and slips into historical silence, but his footprints may trace eastward, far beyond Galilee. Hey guys, tonight we slip into sandals far too big for most feet and chase the soft footprints of a boy who vanishes from history just as he starts to speak with clarity. You stand in the shadowy corridors of the temple in Jerusalem, the air thick with incense, the shuffle of pilgrims echoing around marble column. And there he is, 12 years old, radiant with something otherworldly, calmly debating teachers twice his age, their eyebrows raised higher with every question he asks. This is the last time anyone officially sees him for nearly 2 decades. And then, poof, silent. You blink and he's gone. The Gospels go quiet. Not a letter, not a story, not even a scroll scribble. It's the kind of blackout that makes scholars sweat and conspiracy lovers giddy. Where did he go? What happened between ages 12 and 30? And most importantly, what if he didn't just stay home in Nazareth, twiddling his thumbs and waiting for his Messiah moment? You probably won't survive this rabbit hole. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it in your part of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the dusty streets of first century Jerusalem, still humming with energy after Passover. Families are packing up, Roman soldiers are yawning on cornerstones, and the boy Jesus should be on his way back to Nazareth with his parents. But he's not. You're retracing their frantic footsteps, looping through side streets and temple courtyard. When Mary and Joseph finally find him, he's sitting cross-legged in deep conversation with the elders, tossing around Torah verses like riddles. It's not just what he says, it's how he says it. Calm, measured, like someone 2 or 3 times his age. "Didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house?" he says, with that barely there smirk that might be reverent, or just really cheeky. Then the curtain drops. No gospel records, no family updates. The next time we meet him, he's 30, waist deep in the Jordan, getting dunked by John the Baptist. It's the equivalent of watching someone ace the school spelling bee and then fast forwarding to them accepting a Nobel Prize with no clue what happened in between. Historians still argue whether this lost period was a deliberate omission, a narrative choice, or just plain ignorance. Some say he stayed put in Nazareth, quietly learning carpentry under Joseph, maybe developing calluses instead of doctrine. Others suggest something far more intriguing, that he traveled, not just to nearby villages, but far, far away. You pause on a hill just outside Jerusalem, the wind teasing your robe, the city glinting behind you. Ahead lies a web of trade routes: silk, spice, incense, spanning from Egypt to Persia to India and beyond. These roads weren't just for goods. They carried stories, ideas, dreams, and travelers. If a curious boy from Galilee had questions bigger than the rabbis could answer, maybe he followed the roads. Here's a mainstream historical fact. First century Galilee was far from isolated. Sepphoris, a Greco-Roman city just a morning's walk from Nazareth, buzzed with philosophy, architecture, and politics. Jesus could have been exposed to Hellenistic culture without ever crossing a border. But he might have gone farther. You sip from a cracked clay jug, tasting the dust of possibilities. Some traditions, mostly Eastern, claim Jesus traveled east, mingling with mystics, learning languages, absorbing meditation techniques centuries ahead of the Western curve. Fringe? Maybe. But then again, it wouldn't be the first time history edited for brevity. In Ladakh, near the India-Tibet border, there's a monastery called Hemis. Quiet place. Smells like old wood and butterland. And tucked into its legends is a tale of a Saint Issa, a Westerner with miraculous powers whose words resemble the Beatitudes long before they were ever preached in Galilee. Coincidence? Could be, or maybe it's a breadcrumb. Meanwhile, the Essenes, those strange desert dwellers near the Dead Sea, were doing their own spiritual thing, a mix of apocalyptic poetry, strict discipline, and cosmic vibes. Some think Jesus might have spent time with them, learning their scroll-born secrets. Others roll their eyes and say, no, he was just in Nazareth, doing chores and being boring. You stand between those two camps, hands on your hips, gazing east. What if both are wrong? What if he dipped in and out home sometimes, abroad others? Maybe he spent winters by the fire in Galilee and summers chasing sunrises in Persia. Fringe tidbit incoming. There's a theory, half history, half whisper, that a teen Jesus studied Zoroastrian rituals in Persia, sacred fire temples, dualistic cosmology, light and darkness. Sound familiar? It's a stretch, sure. But then again, you've already swallowed a talking snake and an ark full of pears. What's one more leap? You brush past a fig tree, the fruit sticky sweet, and imagine him young, curious, wide-eyed, asking questions no one had answers for. Maybe his travels weren't about finding religion, but surviving adolescence. Maybe the Messiah had a teenage identity crisis like the rest of us. And remember, literacy was rare, but not impossible. If he could read scrolls in Hebrew at 12, it's not wild to think he could learn Aramaic, Greek, even Sanskrit with the right teachers. He was the sponge, and there were wells all around him, deep ancient wells. The sun sets behind Jerusalem now, its sandstone glowing like ember. You think about the people who saw him leave that city and never knew where he went. About Mary, wondering if her son was chasing prophets or just running from carpentry. Was it exile? Was it mission? Or just the long way home? You close your eyes and step forward into the silence between scripture verses, a silence that hums with possibility. The lost years have just begun. Caravans and curiosity, you followed trade routes through dusty deserts and into bustling bazaars where a teenage Jesus may have soaked up foreign tongues and teachings. You hitch a ride on a creaking caravan, camels grumbling, wheels straining, wind tugging at your robe like an impatient child. The air tastes of sweat, cinnamon and sand. This is no vacation. It's the Silk Road, the incense route, the arteries of ancient commerce and culture stretching across continents like divine veins. And somewhere on this long road perhaps walks a teenage Jesus. You imagine him at 15, not yet the bearded prophet with a 1,000-yard stare, but lean, sun-darkened, his eyes bright with the thrill of movement. Nazareth is behind him, home-cooked lentils replaced with caravan fare. He trades chores for questions, customs for curiosity. You walk beside him, dodging donkey droppings and eavesdropping on a dozen languages, bouncing between tents. Historians still argue whether the boy ever left the Levant. Some insist there's no archaeological evidence, no Roman travel record, no diary entry from an Indian monk that says, "Met Jesus today. Nice guy." But the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence, right? Mainstream fact time. During the 1st century, trade routes connected the Roman Empire with India and China. Goods moved. People moved. Ideas moved. From Damascus to Taxila, the road hummed with movement. The Greeks had already been in India for centuries, thanks to Alexander the Great, and Jewish communities were sprinkled throughout the East. Jesus wouldn't have been alone if he went, just undocumented. You brush shoulders with traders from Petra, magicians from Mesopotamia, and monks with eyes like mountain snow. Stories flow like water of divine births, miraculous healings, gods in disguise. You wonder if Jesus heard them and thought, noted. Maybe these weren't just tales. Maybe they were templates. And then there's the fringe stuff. You hear rumors of a scroll found in India, something about Issa again. The story goes that he traveled from Israel to study under Brahmins, preached against caste injustice, and got kicked out for it. Same guy? Could be. Or just a parallel tale, a spiritual remix passed down like oral folklore and twisted by time. You squint into the firelight of a caravan camp. Jesus, let's say 16, now sits beside an old Persian trader. The man recites bits of the Avesta, talking about Ahura Mazda and the eternal struggle between truth and deceit. Jesus listens. Lips parted slightly, the way someone does when a familiar melody drifts out of an unfamiliar tune. Light and dark, truth and lies. Sound familiar? At another stop, a young Buddhist monk speaks of compassion and detachment, of finding peace through stillness. Jesus asks questions. The monk replies with riddles. You sip spiced tea and feel time slow to a hush. Do not cling to suffering, the monk says. But what if you choose it for someone else's sake? Jesus replies. You're not sure if that conversation happened, but it could have. That's the thing about the lost years, they stretch wide with possibility. Let's slide into a little-known tidbit. Ancient Alexandria, Egypt, was a hotspot of spiritual fusion. Greek philosophy mixed with Jewish mysticism and Egyptian ritual like some cosmic cocktail. There was even a Jewish sect known as the Therapeuti Quiet, ascetic, possibly Essene cousins who blended healing, scripture, and silence. Some fringe scholars think Jesus might have passed through, absorbing the contemplative habits they practiced. But tonight, you're riding eastward, through Damascus, where Roman architecture meets Eastern spice, through Palmyra, her columns crumbling under the sun even then, past Babylon's ghost, and maybe, just maybe, into the Indus Valley. You imagine Jesus picking up phrases in Sanskrit, practicing yoga-like postures before dawn, watching temple dancers whose gestures are prayers, smiling at a child who asks why God made mosquitoes. The answers he gathers aren't always spoken. Sometimes they arrive in the way of flame flickers and stillness, or the silence between a temple bell's toll. And he's changing slowly. His accent softens, his posture straightens, his gaze deepens. He walks barefoot more often, not out of poverty, but preference. Maybe shoes muffle the world too much. At 17, he helps a merchant's daughter carry water pots. She asks why he's traveling. He pauses, then says, because the world is larger than the scrolls. She doesn't understand, but she remembers the gentleness in his voice. One night, under a crescent moon, you both stare at constellations mirrored in a desert lake. Those stars, he murmurs, are the same ones Abraham saw. You nod, feeling the ancient pull of stories written in light. Caravans are temporary. They scatter like seeds on the wind. But Jesus seems to carry everyone with him, the butcher from Antioch, the flute player from Susa, the tea master from Bactria. Their words become compost for his later parable. Historians are split on whether he would have even had the means to travel. Wasn't he poor? Wasn't Joseph a mere craftsman? But some say tekton, that Greek word we translate as carpenter, might have meant something broader like builder or even artisan, contractor. It's possible he picked up gigs along the way, fixing carts, helping masons, building a reputation for more than just sermon. You pass into India now, where the heat thickens and the language curves. Markets here are chaos and color. He could blend in or stand out, depending on the crowd. Maybe he stays with a Buddhist Sangha in Mathura. Maybe he debates wandering Jain monks under neem trees. You picture him asking more questions than he answers. At 19, he writes nothing down. He records everything in silence, through presence. That becomes a pattern. By the way, Jesus almost never writes. The guy who becomes the most quoted figure in Western civilization barely picks up a pen. Irone level, divai. Still, you keep walking with him, through deserts and river valleys, past temples and tombs, listening to every stray proverb he tucks away. And when people say there's no proof he ever left home, you just smile. Maybe footprints vanish, maybe scrolls burn. But sometimes the road remembers in ways paper never could. 3. Sandal prints in the Himalayas. In a Himalayan monastery, legends whisper of a holy youth from the West who baffles monks with parables and healing. Sandal prints in the Himalayas. In a Himalayan monastery, legends whisper of a holy youth from the West who baffles monks with parables and healings. You wake to snow-capped peaks, crisp air like cold incense filling your lungs. The road's gone narrow, steep, and the silence here feels heavier, more sacred. You're deep in the Himalayas now, following whispers through pine forests and valleys that fold into themselves like ancient secrets. And somewhere, maybe behind that next ridge or beneath that prayer flag-draped monastery, is a thread of legend that insists Jesus once walked these heights. The monastery at Hemus looms like a dream carved from stone and prayer. The monks here don't rush. They glide. You slip inside, and the hush is so complete you hear your heartbeat echo in the stone. A few centuries ago, a Russian traveler named Nicholas Notovich claimed he found a manuscript here, The Life of Saint Issa. According to him, it tells of a boy from the West who studied with sages in India and Tibet, preached a gospel of love, and was persecuted for challenging caste. Fringe? Oh, absolutely. But deliciously intriguing. You imagine Jesus here, let's say he's 20 now, draped in simple robes, kneeling beside Himalayan prayer wheels. His breath clouds in the cold as he listens to chants that stretch across generation. The monks don't care where he's from. They care how still he can sit, how fully he can listen. Historians still argue whether Notovich made the whole thing up. Some say yes, some shrug and say, even if he did, these legends had to come from somewhere. And more than one researcher has quietly admitted that the locals of Ladakh do pass down tales of a prophet from the West. They call him Isa, and they say he brought wisdom, healed strangers, and vanished one day without a trace. You wander through these halls and feel the walls themselves hum with memory. There are no portraits, no relics with name tags, just flickering lamps and the scent of ghee and juniper. And yet, something about the atmosphere makes you feel like he's been here. Let's toss in a mainstream historical fact while we're wrapped in all this incense. During the 1st century, Buddhism had already spread along trade routes from India into Central Asia. Monasteries dotted the road like spiritual truck stops. Travelers were welcome. Ideas flowed freely. Jesus, if he were seeking, wouldn't have looked out of place here. You picture him meditating beside a mountain stream, watching the water slip past rocks that don't resist. Maybe that becomes part of a future teaching. Maybe turn the other cheek starts here, not from meekness, but from flow. The strength to yield without breaking. He might have spent weeks here, maybe months. There's a calm that takes time to earn. And the monks would have been curious too. Here's a young man who speaks in parables, who listens more than he speaks, who heals small wounds with strange prayers and herb. One elderly monk watches him from a distance. He doesn't chase answers, the monk says. He waits until they notice him. You grin. That sounds like him. Then comes a story. Local legend. You hear it from a novice monk with a grin and a love of drama. One day, Issa walks into a village where a child is dying. The family wails, the healer's given up. But Issa touches the child's head, prays quietly in a strange tongue, and the fever breaks. The villagers whisper, he is more than a man. Of course, that's what they always say, right? Still, it lingers. In this monastery, no one's in a rush to confirm or deny. They let the mystery live. You walk past a shelf of ancient texts. None say Jesus of Nazareth on the spine, but the story floats in the air like incense too faint to grab, too strong to forget. At 21, maybe he starts walking again, southward, through valleys carved by time and ice, into Kashmir, where the hills pulse with mysticism. Here he might have crossed paths with Hindu sages, Sufi precursors, or Jain renunciants. You picture him sitting beneath a banyan tree, feet caked with dust, eyes focused on a teacher who speaks in riddles about karma, dharma, and the illusions of self. Did he argue? Did he listen? Did he laugh? Here's a quirky tidbit to round things out. Some alternative historians believe Jesus didn't just visit the East, but returned there after the crucifixion. Yeah, you heard that right. There's a tomb in Srinagar, Kashmir, called the Rosabal Shrine, that locals say belongs to Uz Asaf, a prophet from the West. The marker? A carving of feet with crucifixion scars. Wild, right? You're not endorsing it. But the story is persistent. You pass travelers who speak of a soft-eyed stranger who never begged, but was never hungry, who seemed to know people before they spoke, who once calmed a rabid dog with a word, who preached compassion in a voice that made you cry and smile at the same time. The legends snowball, but their center is always this man. Quiet, kind, clever, lost to history, but remembered in whispers. By 23, maybe he heads back west. Or maybe he lingers. There's time yet. Maybe he needs to unlearn some of what he's learned before he steps back into sandals that say, Savior. Maybe he's not ready to be him yet. You rest one evening near a frozen lake. The stars here don't twinkle, they burn. You and he lie back in silence. A monk nearby hums a mantra that melts into the cold. He turns to you and murmurs, they'll never believe where I've been. You nod. Does it matter? He closes his eyes, only to those who ask. Mystic or manual laborer? You work alongside Jesus in dusty workshops and maybe in esoteric schools as debates swirl about whether he studied, preached, or just built tables.
You're back in the dust now. Hot, dry, familiar. Gone are the snow caps and prayer wheels. You wipe the sweat from your brow as you squint across the yellow-brown haze of Galilee. And there he is again. 24? Maybe 25. No longer a wanderer in saffron robes. No monastery bells. No camel caravans. Just a man with sun-chapped lips and sawdust in his hair, hauling a beam of olive wood across a tiny workshop. Jesus, the craftsman, or more precisely, tekton. It's a term that's been misunderstood over time. You've heard it translated as carpenter, like he spent his 20s making rocking chairs. But tekton could mean builder, artisan, even stoneworker. And in Galilee, where forests are sparse but quarries are plenty, stone makes more sense than cedar. So you stand beside him, hefting chisels, wiping grit from your palms. The sound of mallet against limestone echoes like a heartbeat. Maybe this was the soundtrack of his silent years, grinding, hammering, shaping rough edges into something usable. Like a metaphor he hasn't said out loud yet. Historians still argue whether this was a full-time job or just cover. Was he quietly absorbing mystical teachings while pretending to fix fences? Or was this the entire story? A humble life, deep in the grain of every plank he planed? Some scholars believe his work might have taken him beyond sleepy Nazareth. Just 4 miles away was Sepphoris, a Roman city booming with construction. Think art, amphitheaters, aqueducts, the whole imperial aesthetic. A tekton could have found steady work there. It's possible that during the day, Jesus built columns for tax collectors, then at night debated Torah with street philosophers in dark courtyards. You imagine him, mid-20s now, standing in a bustling plaza, covered in dust, arguing metaphysics with a drunk poet. But if the kingdom of heaven is within, what's outside for? The poet slurs. Jesus smiles, sips water, and says, "To remind you, you're thirsty." The guy nearly weeps. You hide a grin. Still, the days blur. Work, eat, pray, sleep. Repeat. To the neighbors, he's just that quiet builder with the sharp eyes and kind smile. Nothing messianic about him. He doesn't make speeches. He doesn't gather followers. He builds roofs. But maybe the work isn't wasted. Maybe each stone laid and joint fitted becomes part of the parables he'll later toss into crowds like breadcrumbs. The lost coin, the hidden pearl, the house on sand versus rock, all metaphors born of labor, not theory. Here's your mainstream historical anchor. Nazareth, at the time, was a small town. Maybe 200 to 400 people tops. Everyone knew everyone. If Jesus stayed put during these years, people would have remembered him as the quiet builder, not the preacher. And yet, when he begins his ministry later, folks are shocked. "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" they say. That line, that tells you something. Whatever else he was doing, it wasn't preaching. Not yet. And yet, you can't shake the feeling that something else was brewing. Maybe not in temples or mountaintop monasteries. Maybe right here in the muscle memory of hammering, in the ache of lifting limestone blocks. Maybe the discipline of work carved the patience he'd need when facing Roman governors or arguing with lawyers in dusty synagogues. Let's throw in a fringe notion. Some believe that Jesus trained with a secretive sect during these years. Not the Essenes this time, something even more obscure. There's talk of a proto-Gnostic brotherhood, scattered through Egypt and southern Judea. They didn't write much, mostly oral teachings, layers of meaning. Some think he slipped away occasionally from the workbench to meet with mystics in caves, maybe on Sabbath days, maybe under moonlight. You picture it. He wipes sawdust from his tunic, steps past the town's edge, and hikes through olive groves until he reaches a torch-lit cave. Inside, a circle of robed men and women chants slow syllables, half prayer, half riddle. He joins in, not as teacher, but student. Or maybe he was just tired of the noise. Some days, you find him staring at the hills beyond Nazareth, lips moving silently, maybe praying, maybe reciting a parable he hasn't told yet. You sense the restlessness, like something inside him is pressing outward, like the way sap stretches bark before a tree splits. You don't hear him preach yet, but you do hear him sing. Low, rough songs in Aramaic, Hebrew, and something else. Maybe Sanskrit, maybe Persian. You tilt your head. He's blending syllables from different continents. Like languages are just clothes and he wears whatever fits the day. You share a meal in a neighbor's courtyard. He breaks flatbread and dips it into oil. A child asks if God likes bread. Jesus says, "He made wheat taste like clouds." Of course he does. Everyone laughs, but you feel it, the weight in his answer. The way he makes the mundane feel cosmic. Still, no miracles, No multiplying fish, no blind men healed, just a steady man, building doors for houses he'll never enter again. And maybe, just maybe, you hear a whisper that one of his side projects is a mikveh, a ritual bath. Quiet construction for a quiet ritual. Cleanliness, renewal, rebirth, it lingers in your mind like foreshadowing. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the ruins of Sepphoris, archaeologists have found Greco-Roman mosaics with figures scholars dub the Mona Lisa of the Galilee. Could he have walked past her face every morning? Could that strange intersection of cultured Jewish piety and Roman flair have stirred something in his future sermons about Caesar and the soul? Late one evening, you sit with him on a half-built rooftop. The stars spread out like a scroll overhead. He says nothing for a long time. Then softly, "It's almost time." You blink. Time for what? He just looks at the moon and says, "To speak louder." And that's when you know, the years of building are nearly over.
Desert wanderer, river watcher. You drift through Egypt's sacred sands and India's flowing rivers, chasing tales of Jesus as a spiritual pilgrim or silent student of sages. You wake to heat. Not the soft warmth of a Galilean sunrise, but the fierce shimmer of desert, stretching endlessly in every direction. Your sandals crunch over sun-baked earth as you follow Jesus through the blistering quiet. He's 26 or 27 now, maybe older. No hammer in hand, no stones to shape. Just the long, parched silence of wilderness pressing in from every side. This is the phase where it's unclear whether he's on a mission or just unraveling. You're not in Nazareth anymore. You're in the in-between those strange borderlands where geography gets symbolic and the mundane starts to blur into myth. He spends his days walking. Sometimes he's in the Negev, where the land rolls like a dried-out sea. Other times, he's hugging the Nile in Egypt, passing Coptic enclaves and ancient temples swallowed by sand. Or maybe he's back near the Jordan, where reeds sway and herons wade like old souls. Either way, you're never quite sure where you are, only that you're far from the familiar. Historians still argue whether these wanderings happened at all. Some say he went to Egypt after fleeing Herod as a child and returned only once grown. Others say he returned later, drawn by something deeper than memory. There's even speculation that he studied in Alexandria, brushing shoulders with Jewish philosophers and proto-Christian mystics near the Library of Alexandria. If that library could talk, oh boy, mainstream historical fact for your map, Alexandria was a 1st century melting pot. Greek rationalism, Jewish mysticism, Egyptian ritual, and early forms of Christian philosophy, all brewed in the same intellectual teapot. Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher around Jesus' time, was trying to merge Torah with Plato. Imagine Jesus slipping into those circles, not to debate, just to listen, to sip from ideas like they were wine. But let's pivot to the Nile for a moment. You watch Jesus as he washes his face in the murky, slow-moving current. He speaks to no one for days. Then suddenly he asks a question. What do fish dream about? You blink. He grins. Probably not sin. You laugh, even though the sun's already made your brain soft. These wanderings aren't aimless, though they look it. Sometimes he fasts, sometimes he feasts. One day, he buys figs from a woman with cataracts and leaves her smiling, though she never saw his face clearly. Another day, he shares bread with a mute shepherd who writes prayers in the dust with a stick. Jesus reads them aloud. Here's your fringe tidbit. In southern Egypt, there was sects like the therapeutic quiet Jewish ascetics who lived near Lake Mareotis. They prayed in silence, wrote mystical songs, and meditated on sacred texts. Some believe Jesus may have joined them for a time. No miracles, no sermons. Just stillness, poetry, and the echo of ancient psalms bouncing off desert stone. One evening, as the sky drips fire, Jesus climbs a crumbling hill and stands overlooking a riverbed gone dry. He murmurs something about wells that never run out. Then he goes still, so still you forget he's there. The wind stirs his cloak like a whisper. You start to wonder, is this preparation or recovery? There's a weariness in him now, not just physical. Like he's tasted too much truth too quickly, like the world's beauty aches more than it soothes. But also, there's peace, the kind that settles in a person who's stopped pretending they can avoid pain. And then you reach the Ganges. Yeah, you heard that right. Whether metaphor or myth, some strands of lore claim Jesus reached India again during these years. Not as a wide-eyed teen, but as a quieter, steadier man. This time he doesn't come to learn. He comes to sit. In Varanasi maybe, or along the edges of Bihar, you watch him crouch among sadhus, the holy men of India. Some naked, some painted, all radiant in their own strange ways. They don't ask his name, they ask, "What are you not?" A very different game. He responds with a story about a man who sold all he had to buy a field hiding treasure. They nod, one chuckles. Good, but who buried it there? Jesus doesn't answer. This is his style now. Less answers, more invitation. Less instruction, more image. By now he might be 28 or 29. The years are running out, but there's no rush. You spend long afternoons under banyan trees watching monkeys fight and children play in muddy streets. You follow him to funeral pyres and wedding dances, and always he watches with that same still, unshaken attention. He says one day, "Truth isn't hidden. We just keep stepping over it." You nod, unsure if you agree or just like the sound of it. Historians will never agree whether these Eastern journeys happened. There's too little to confirm, too much to imagine. But even if he stayed close to home, you sense something undeniable. By the time Jesus appears at the Jordan, he knows things not taught in synagogues or workshops. He speaks in layers. He teaches like someone who has walked not just streets, but cultures. You end this phase at the edge of a desert, not the one he'll fast in, but a metaphorical one, a spiritual blankness before the storm. He kneels to pray, palms open, voice low. He says, "The voice is coming soon." You glance around, the wind picks up. A crow screams across the sky. He doesn't flinch. Return of the quiet man. He re-emerges at the Jordan with no backstory, but you've seen hints, rituals, scars, echoes of distant wisdom of where he might have been. You stand now at the edge of the Jordan River, where the reeds sway in the breath of something ancient. The water is sluggish, dark in places, and surprisingly cold when you kneel to touch it. You've followed him across decades, temples, deserts, scrolls, and silences. But here at 30, Jesus steps from mystery into motion, and nobody, not John, not the crowd, not even you, is ready for what's walking out of that wilderness. He emerges quiet, lean, unremarkable at first glance. His hair is longer now, pulled back with the rough grace of someone who doesn't check his reflection too often. His robe is plain, no golden aura, no thunderclouds. But still something about him makes people part like water. John the Baptist, wild-eyed, camel-hair prophet with honey in his beard, spots him mid-baptism. Stops everything. "Behold the Lamb of God," he says, half in awe, half in disbelief. Jesus doesn't speak. He just wades into the river, locks eyes with his cousin, and nods. Historians still argue whether John recognized Jesus from shared history or divine insight. Some say they hadn't seen each other since childhood. Others think they crossed paths in the wilderness, maybe traded parables and cactus fruit over fire. But what's clear is this: when Jesus shows up, something shifts. Like history holds its breath. Mainstream fact: baptism in the first century wasn't about cute baby blessings. It was purification, transformation, a symbolic death, and rebirth. When Jesus submits to it, people are confused. Shouldn't he be the one doing the dunking? But he doesn't explain. He just lowers himself into the current. And as he rises, dripping, the sky does that thing again, pulls back like theatre curtains. A dove drops down, soft and slow, and a voice booms, or maybe whispers, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." You shiver, though the sun is hot. This is the first time in almost 20 years that Jesus is publicly noticed. And there's no resume. No one knows where he's been. It's like he appeared out of fog, fully formed, deeply grounded, disturbingly calm. People murmur, "Isn't that the carpenter from Nazareth? Didn't he used to fix yokes and patch roofs?" You remember the work, the stone and sawdust. But they don't see that. They only see the man who glides through crowds like he's following music no one else can hear. And here's where it gets wild. Some think this is when he really starts to remember who he is. That until now, he was living as fully human, no cosmic cheat codes, no divine override, just intuition and inner fire. But the baptism? That's ignition. That's when the switch flips and the clarity floods in. Fringe tidbit: in some mystical traditions, it's believed that the Christ Spirit descended upon Jesus at his baptism, not before, that the divine and human truly merged in that water. A layered take, controversial in churches, but deliciously provocative. You follow him back into the wilderness 40 days. No food, no comfort, just the wind gnawing at skin and the desert whispering lies. But you've seen him train for this, in monasteries, in riverbeds, on rooftops under stars. This is his silent PhD thesis. By the time he walks out, gaunt but blazing, even the rocks seem to lean toward him. The lost years are over. The voice is ready. He returns to Galilee and visits the synagogue, unrolling the scroll of Isaiah like it's his old favorite novel. His voice doesn't shake. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," he reads. "He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor." Then he rolls it back up, sits down and adds, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Mic drop. The room blinks. Someone coughs. Then the murmuring begins. Wait, what? You remember the man who once sanded tables and lifted stones? He's not that anymore. Not quite. His words slice now. His eyes burn with recognition, like he sees not just your face, but what you're trying to hide behind it. Some are drawn in. Others start sharpening rock. The lost years haven't just seasoned him, they've armored him. You can hear it in his silence. He doesn't rush, doesn't waste breath. When he speaks, it's precise, like chiseling truth from marble. Every parable is loaded with layers from the places he's been: fig trees from Judea, seeds from India, houses built on rock, lamps hidden under baskets. Everything means more than it looks like it means. A woman offers him water. He thanks her in Aramaic, but you catch a Sanskrit word in the cadence. An old man tries to trip him up with legal jargon, but Jesus answers like someone who's argued with both Roman engineers and Persian priests. His style is a fusion not academic but poetic, not trained but form. And the scars, did you notice them? Not on his hands yet, but on his feet. From years of walking, on his shoulder. From carrying too much alone. On his heart, you don't need eyes to see though. You sit with him one night by a fire, the disciples still unsure what exactly they've signed up for. He watches the flames, pokes them gently with a stick, and says, "There are things I've seen I'll never explain." You nod, whisper, "Were they worth it?" He doesn't answer, just stares into the embers and lets the silence stretch. The lost years haven't left proof. No scrolls, no letters. But if you look closely, if you lean in, you'll find the echoes. In his phrasing, in the way he waits before answering, in the long pauses between miracles. The Jesus who emerges from the wilderness isn't just a local boy with a calling. He's a tapestry of worlds, a map that walked. He carries rivers in his voice now, mountains in his posture, temples, deserts, scrolls, silence, all wrapped in skin and bone. He is no longer lost. He's returned.